Imagine how they established guidelines meant to keep you small, to confine your every breath. Those rules glinted with the promise of safety, but carried a hidden edge, one aimed straight at your independence. A casual observer might think these rules were harmless, just boundaries for a shared space. But you sensed the deeper plot. Each rule chipped away at your freedom, each demand pushing you towards silent obedience. They disguised these constraints as concerns or mutual agreements, yet the taste felt bitter. Behind kind words lurked the intention of placing you under a quiet control. At first, you tried to follow the script, hoping kindness or compromise might protect the harmony. You swallowed doubts, adjusted yourself to fit their narrow mold, letting them believe you accepted the role of the docile partner. However, in the stillness of late night, your mind churned with unease. You realized this wasn't a relationship built on respect, but on invisible shackles. That might have been the final straw. You decided to break every rule they formed, not out of rebellion for its own sake, but to reclaim yourself from illusions that you ever belonged to them. With each broken rule, you tasted a fresh rush of air, a sense that your inner voice was returning. They had hoped you would cower in guilt, but you found yourself thriving, standing tall without regret. A hush followed every rule you shattered, as if the entire dynamic paused to register the shift. The one who wrote the rules couldn't fathom your audacity. They had banked on your fear of conflict or your craving for validation. Perhaps they believed you would always stoop to keep the peace. So when you calmly crossed out each boundary they set, you left them unsettled. They tried to enforce old agreements by repeating statements about unity or trust, but the words rang hollow. You recognize that real unity doesn't arise from a partner's one-sided mandates. Trust doesn't spring from restricting someone's sense of self. So the more they insisted, the more you realized how much of their power relied on your willingness to comply. Without that willingness, their illusions of being the authority crumbled. And so, you advanced day by day, shattering illusions they had woven so carefully. Friends or outsiders might ask if you feared a backlash, yet you found a strange confidence in forging your own path. That confidence unsettled them far more than if you had fought with anger. By acting with calm certainty, you showed that you no longer needed their acceptance or pity. Suddenly, their rules looked like cheap attempts at control. They discovered you could walk out any moment, carry your heart and soul wherever you chose, unafraid of any punishment. The one who set the rules realized they'd never again see you bend as before. Think of all the nights you once spent trying to rationalize their conditions, asking yourself if you were overreacting. But each sunrise confirmed that your instincts were right. Those so-called rules only benefited them. They might have paraded them under the guise of mutual respect, but you saw how each line was drawn to curb your potential or quell your curiosity. They insisted you remain within the lines of their comfort zone. If you questioned them, they changed the subject or turned the blame on you, wielding guilt as a weapon. That guilt pressed into your chest, urging you to comply. Over time, you grew weary of the subtle tyranny. Something in your spirit started pushing back. You stopped apologizing for normal human emotions. You refused to hush your laughter or hide your ambitions just to make them feel in control. In those small rebellions, you tasted the first droplets of real freedom. Each act of defiance, no matter how minor, reminded you that you owned your life. And once you realized you owned it, nobody else could set rules for how you expressed your soul. They recognized that shift too, though they'd never admit it out loud. Their panic manifested as new demands, but each demand found you less pliable, more certain of your right to shape your life. Breaking the rules they'd written began to feel as essential as breathing. A subtle darkness shadowed your every move, as though they were always watching, ready to chastise if you stepped out of line. But the day came when you stepped out of line and did not bother to look back. You simply kept going. The hush that followed was more telling than any argument. They tried to pretend your disobedience was a phase. They spread stories about your change in behavior, painting you as reckless or ungrateful. But the narratives failed to capture the reality. Your choice was an act of self-rescue. You were done, dancing to rhythms that never respected your spirit. Freed from that oppressive beat, you explored your own pace, listened to the quiet song in your chest that had lain dormant. Others began to see something new in your eyes, a fearless glint that said you'd confront any storm. They attempted to rope you back into their world of rules, but you brushed them aside like dust. It wasn't a roar of defiance, just a calm, absolute refusal to live any further under constraints that lacked respect. The watchers, some curious, some disapproving, bore witness. Through the Seisdeichar Feyr, Bertofa whispers you gleaned how deeply your shift unsettled them. People fear unrestrained spirits, for it's easier to label them rebellious or monstrous than to understand them. You no longer cared. The absence of apology in your posture told them you'd chosen yourself over their illusions. Perhaps the darkest humor arises in how quickly they tried to rewrite the story once they saw you thriving. They began describing how they had never truly limited your freedom, how the rules were misunderstandings. Yet you recalled each time they used those rules as a leash. Each moment they tried to corral your identity. Now that you'd slipped the leash, their memory became conveniently blurry. This shift didn't surprise you. Controlling types rarely admit wrongdoing, especially after losing control. The new narrative portrayed them as supportive, even protective. But you had endured enough to see through the facade. Knowing your ability to flourish beyond their boundaries shook their confidence. Their attempt to reclaim the upper hand through revisionist history only made them appear weaker. Meanwhile, your sense of direction sharpened. When you finally spoke, you did so with unwavering calm, laying out how you'd never again be contained by anyone's narrow worldview. The tension in the air said it all. They recognized a force beyond their grasp. No wail or bargain could drag you back into that cage. The watchers, who once smirked at your quiet compliance, watched with uneasy stares, uncertain how to engage a spirit that found its own wings. The old version of you might have extended an olive branch, tried to smooth over ruffled feathers to keep peace. But the new you recognized that such efforts would only place shackles on your ankles again. You gleaned that real peace arises from self-respect, not from earning validation from those who once insisted on controlling you. While they tried to guilt or coax you back, you marched toward the life you deserved. The darkness that once intimidated you now became a friend, teaching you that no external pressure can overshadow an internal compass. In stepping away from their scripted roles, you discovered an inner reservoir of creativity. Freed from stifling conditions, your mind blossomed with ideas, your heart with ambition. The old group gawked, whispering that you'd gone too far. But you'd already tried playing it safe, found it suffocating. So you embraced the paradox. Sometimes to save yourself, you must be willing to disregard all the rules others try to impose. And in that disregard, you found an entire horizon of potential. They set the rules in your relationship. You broke them all and thrived. Others doubted you'd manage alone, claimed you needed their structure. But your progress proved otherwise. Each day brought a small win or a revelation about your own strength. Confidence replaced caution. Excitement replaced dread. Those who set the rules started to regret underestimating you. They realized the rules they'd placed had actually become your reasons to rebel. They saw you flourish in the absence of their control. A slow horror gripped them as they realized you did not sink without their guidance. You soared. This success bit into their pride, for it dismantled the myth that you were too weak or too naive to function independently. They might make final attempts to lure you back with half-hearted offers, but your mind no longer wavered. The bond they'd forced had snapped. In that moment, it became clear that your happiness was never contingent on their definitions or allowances. You smiled at how liberating it felt to shape your days without a looming sense of guilt or self-minimization. Freed from illusions, you directed your own path. Some might say your transformation veers into arrogance or rebellion for its own sake. Let them say what they want. The deeper point was always about preserving your essence, refusing to be labeled as someone who cannot decide for themselves. They never predicted you'd rise this high, or that you'd do so gracefully. That might sting them as much as any direct confrontation. They see your life expanding in directions they never considered possible under their framework of rules. They attempt to sow doubt again, but your new foundation stands immovable. The joy you radiate, subtle though it is, unsettles them more than anger. Anger would suggest you still care about their opinions. Instead, your indifference seals your independence. Over time, you find new ways to channel creativity, forging alliances with those who appreciate a mind unfettered by pointless restrictions. Each step into that new territory reaffirms your decision to smash the rules. Exhilaration replaces the old fear that once lived in your chest. Others, observing from the edges, begin to question their own cages. Quietly, you've become a symbol of what happens when one refuses to bow to illusions. In the final hush, your gaze drifts back on the path behind you. Broken rules, broken illusions, but a heart that pulses with freedom. The watchers who set those rules remain in a confused state, trying to patch the cracks in their worldview. They might throw out attempts at sabotage or gossip, but you walk on. You're not the docile figure they assumed. Instead, you harness a power discovered by stepping beyond the lines they drew. Freed from a script that never cared for your spirit, you carve a new story. This story echoes with subtle darkness. Yes, but also with unstoppable determination. Sometimes you sense their eyes on you, still expecting you to falter, to come crawling back. You do not falter, do not return. By refusing their conditions, you soared, and that remains your silent victory. After all, the most remarkable vengeance is your quiet success. Rules can be comforting to those who fear the unknown, who prefer boundaries that define each step. However, the moment a person aligns too closely with these constraints, something vital withers. Imagine a stage set under dim lights, each corner overshadowed by strict instructions, telling the performer how to move, what lines to utter, how to react when the unexpected happens. The performer, dutifully following these cues, never wanders off the script. At first, this might feel safe, free from the confusion of choice. Yet beneath that, safety slithers, a creeping emptiness. Without new experiences and personal freedom, the performer's potential is choked off. Life becomes a hollow rendition of a performance, repeated night after night, with no room for experimentation or deeper passion. This stagnation seeps into more than just creative endeavors. It touches every aspect of existence, including how one copes with pain or recovers from damage. A mind locked in place by rules struggles to find that spark of individuality needed for true healing. In the wake of trauma, many cling to guidelines and well-meaning advice, an attempt to impose order on the chaos of memory. But genuine healing often requires stepping beyond those lines, wandering into uncomfortable emotional terrain where raw feelings can be confronted and integrated. People try to remain within prescribed notions of acceptable emotional responses, so they bottle up sorrow, anger, and fear, labeling them as problems to be pushed aside. In that bottle, the emotions ferment, growing more potent until they break free in unplanned ways. Such is the dark humor of restricting yourself with rules. The more you tighten your grip, the more your spirit rebels. The longer one remains in that cramped mental space, the more the soul yearns to break through. Healing, like self-discovery, demands that you test the edges of what you thought possible. Only by doing so can you unearth the capacity you never dreamed you held. So while rules might protect in the short term, they stand as high walls that obscure all that lies beyond. And if you cannot see beyond, you remain stuck in a narrow corridor of life, never tasting the wider world that might set you free. Think about a labyrinth formed by rigid guidelines. Some rules might come from family, others from society, friends, or personal fears. For instance, someone might carry the notion that tears are shameful, that showing pain admits failure. Another might believe anger must remain hidden, never expressed. When these rules blend, the result is a labyrinth with corridors leading nowhere, each turn instructing a person to stifle one part of themselves or suppress another. Over time, it becomes difficult to differentiate personal identity from the set of instructions that shape behavior. In that labyrinth, healing from adversity becomes nearly impossible, because healing relies on understanding the full range of your emotions, from fury to sorrow to hope. Yet strict rules discourage such exploration. A wound remains raw if the mind can't process it fully. Suppose someone experiences heartbreak or betrayal, but abides by an unwritten law that forbids talking about it openly. The pain festers in secrecy. The labyrinth's walls block any path to emotional release. Meanwhile, the person wonders why relief remains so elusive. The mind yearns to vent, to scream, to cry. Instead, they stay silent, obeying rules that demand composure. Such composure becomes a grave that buries feelings still alive. So they trudge deeper into this maze, losing sight of an exit. In that gloom, a quiet desperation builds. Something must give, eventually. Either the soul remains entombed by compliance, or a moment arrives where one must shatter the walls. Breaking those walls might look reckless from the outside, but inside, it unleashes an abrupt exhale of relief. Many follow those guidelines out of habit, or fear, or the desire for belonging. But there comes a moment when someone discovers that these frameworks do not align with who they really are, that someone can feel an urgent pull from inside, a whisper suggesting that living in compliance no longer offers growth. The urge to break free surges, fueled by personal values. Those values might be integrity, curiosity, a desire for real connections, or a refusal to compromise on self-expression. The watchers see this stirring of independence and grow uneasy, as though suspecting that their hold is fading. They tighten the rules or intensify the illusions. Yet the person's decision to act beyond these structures remains unwavering. It becomes less about rebellion for rebellion's sake, and more about honoring the call from within. Acting on that call unleashes a darkness, not equated with evil, but with relentless self-loyalty. A darkness that is misunderstood by those who prefer comfort over liberation. In taking this path, the individual sometimes earns the label of villain. Yet that label is irrelevant, overshadowed by the sense of alignment with personal values. The watchers cannot control such a soul. Illusions lose effect when someone sets their sights on the horizon, rather than the chains underfoot. A hush settles among onlookers as the person takes another step, heedless of the watcher's scorn. Personal reasons supply a drive more potent than any communal framework. Each day, the spirit grows bolder. The watchers might whisper warnings, but these fall on ears that have chosen a different tune. Although the watchers speak of chaos or betrayal, the individual only hears a chorus of excuses to remain stagnant. This tension grows thick. A single word from the watchers can no longer hold the power it once did. The one who follows inner values does not seek external validation. No external scolding or attempt at guilt can redirect a will that is anchored in a deeper moral code. The watchers sense it. They sense that their illusions no longer fascinate. And so, the watchers retreat slowly, leaving that individual to navigate a path of self-chosen meaning, a path unafraid of the unknown. Those personal values become a guiding flame that banishes the gloom once created by overbearing social rules. By refusing to stay small, the person seizes the right to define their own life. In that quiet revolution, everything changes. Many relationships begin with gentle promises and shared dreams. So quiet that no one suspects the seeds of control buried in the background. The manipulator often wears a charming exterior, offering sweet words that feel like security blankets. Yet beneath that blanket lurks a shrewd intent: to mold someone's will, to reduce a partner's choices until they revolve around serving the manipulator's desire. Subtle conditions slip into daily life. The manipulator might discourage spending time with friends or family, craft a quiet tension whenever personal independence surfaces. All the while, illusions take shape, convincing the partner that these constraints are normal, that real love means obeying unspoken rules. Step by step, a person finds themselves asking permission for simple actions, editing thoughts to avoid arguments, sacrificing dreams to maintain so-called harmony. Eventually, a sense of emptiness grows, signaling that something is terribly wrong. The manipulator, tasting that emptiness, tries to deepen it further by adding guilt or silent scorn. They feed off the partner's confusion, controlling the narrative that claims the partner is too fragile or too naive to handle life alone. This dynamic deepens every time the partner tries to speak up and is met with calm dismissal. Every time an act of self-expression is met with manufactured drama. But a moment arrives when the partner's spirit refuses to bend anymore. The manipulator sees a new fire ignite behind the partner's eyes, a sign that illusions no longer cloak the chains. Freed from illusions, the partner decides to dismantle each forced rule, one by one, quietly reclaiming the voice that was nearly lost. From then on, the manipulator's hold withers as the partner stands tall, no longer asking permission to exist. In that stance, the manipulator realizes they have lost the game, for the partner now sees the strings meant to bind and chooses to break them. Recovery from such manipulation demands a harsh reckoning with the emotional toll inflicted. At first, the partner might feel guilt for even considering escape, because manipulative relationships often rely on threads of affection and shared history. Healing emerges from discovering personal reasons to act beyond those oppressive rules. These reasons often revolve around authenticity, personal dignity, and the yearning to live unshackled. Once those reasons come into focus, no threat or guilt trap keeps the partner locked away. They tear down illusions that once paralyzed them